You weren't betrayed by an enemy. You were betrayed by something softer, a gentle smile, a warm gaze, a kind word spoken at exactly the moment you needed comfort the most. And you believed it, because the world raised you on a lie. It told you that if you were kind enough, patient enough, good enough, the world would respond in kind. It told you that love means honesty, that vulnerability creates loyalty, that being real means being rewarded. But now you're sitting with the aftermath, a heart picked apart by people who smiled as they took. A mind bruised not by fists, but by silence, by disappointment, by erosion. You're not stupid. You were trained to believe that sincerity guarantees safety, that if your intentions were pure, you couldn't lose. But you did. Because you never learned the rule Machiavelli taught 500 years ago: men are driven not by goodness, but by necessity. They don't stay because they love you. They stay because it's convenient. They stay because you don't question, because your silence makes it easier. And when they've taken all they can, they vanish quietly, without warning, without apology, leaving you to wonder if your kindness was a mistake, if your warmth was weakness, if maybe, just maybe, you were too soft for a world this sharp. Let me be clear, this is not a video for comfort seekers. This is not another be your best self monologue. This is war. A war fought in silence. A war you didn't even realize you were losing. For those who've been drained by being too available, too forgiving, too easy to reach, and even easier to read. If you've ever asked yourself, why do the manipulators always win? Why do the good ones always end up bleeding? Why does giving everything get me nothing? Then stop right now and look again. Not with the eyes of a dreamer, but through the mind of a strategist. Because here, we don't teach you how to be softer. We teach you how to be sharper, more dangerous, without ever raising your voice. It begins by unlearning the oldest lie you've ever swallowed, that goodness guarantees protection. It doesn't. What protects you is presence, perception, and power. Now ask yourself, are you ready to take it back? It doesn't bruise. It doesn't bleed. But it breaks something deep inside you quietly. It's the kind of pain that doesn't scream because it was never allowed to. It whispers. It festers. It grows in silence because you were taught to call it strength. They look at you calm, composed, reasonable, and assume you're untouched, untouchable. They see your patience and call it wisdom. They see your forgiveness and call it virtue. They see your stillness and assume you're at peace. But what they don't see, what they'll never see, is what it cost you to stay that still. Because the truth is, you've been touched more times than you dare to admit, not by violence, but by erosion. By people who leaned on your empathy until they drained it. Who took your compassion as permission? Who mistook your loyalty for blindness? And the worst part? You let them. Not because you were weak, but because you were hopeful. You believed they would change. That if you stayed soft, they'd eventually soften too. You thought kindness would protect you. That understanding would earn you peace. That if you just kept showing up, someone someday would show up for you. But no one did. And still, you stayed. Because that's what you were taught. Stay kind. Stay good. Stay available. Even when it hurts. Even when it kills you slowly. And so you shrunk. You quieted your needs. You became the easy one. The peacekeeper. The forgiver. The one who never asked for too much. The one who stayed even when no one noticed you were slipping. And the world? It applauded. They called you mature. Wise beyond your years. But what they really meant was, you're convenient. You don't make us uncomfortable. They praised your endurance, not because it was noble, but because it let them off the hook. And so you carried their pain. And you buried your own. You called it strength. But deep down, you knew something was dying. Because real strength is not in being silent. It's in being clear. It's not in staying when it hurts, but knowing when to walk away. Machiavelli would have told you the truth. He'd say, if your silence keeps the peace but costs you your soul, it is not virtue. It is surrender. And how many times have you surrendered? Not in battle, but in the everyday betrayals of yourself. In the conversations where your truth sat burning on your tongue and you swallowed it. In the relationships where you knew the pattern, but you stayed predictable, quiet, compliant. Why? Because you feared being too much. You feared the silence your boundaries might create. You didn't want to be the villain in someone else's story. But ask yourself, who's been the villain in yours? Who thrived off your silence, off the version of you that never said no, never asked for more, never pushed back? You've been bleeding quietly, calling it strength, but bleeding is not strength, it's a warning. You were taught to perform peace, to make yourself small so others could feel big, to be good by being easy. But let me be clear, endurance without recognition is not love, it's self-erasure. And this right now is your permission to stop. Stop being their mirror, their comfort, their emotional sponge. Let them call you cold, distant, changed, because you are. You've stepped out of their script. You were not soft for being kind, but you were done being used for it. You were never born this way, you were trained. Trained to flinch at confrontation, to apologize for simply existing, to explain your pain hoping to be heard. But that's not a personality trait, it's programming. The world fed you that programming and then fed on you for it. And now the awakening begins. You no longer owe transparency to people who weaponize it. You no longer give maps to those who only want to control your path. You're not cruel for being unreadable, you're finally safe. Because unreadable means unscripted. And no one can manipulate a story they don't understand. You don't need to be liked to be respected. You don't need to be predictable to be loved. You just need to reclaim yourself. Sovereign, sharp, unbreakable. You were trained to believe that vulnerability always leads to connection, but in the wrong hands, vulnerability becomes leverage. So what now? You unplug the machine. You stop narrating your healing like a broadcast. You stop handing out the user manual to your heart. Exposure is not intimacy, and you've learned often the hard way that too much transparency invites control. From now on, you move with intent, speak with restraint, and let your silence say what your words use to beg for. You're not hiding, you're conserving power. Machiavelli didn't glorify cruelty, he warned against naivety. He understood that true power isn't volume, it's gravity, the kind of presence that commands attention without explanation. So let them call you cold, distant, different, they're right. You've changed. You're no longer predictable. You're not a pattern or a path. You're a storm shifting, sovereign, unreadable. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit, you were trained to betray yourself. Slowly, quietly, in ways that looked like love, loyalty, maturity. But what they called grace was erosion. You silenced your needs. You shrank to keep the peace. You wore strength like armor while breaking inside. And the world clapped for your resilience, your patience, your silence. But what they were really praising was how easy you were to disregard. So let's get clear. Niceness without discernment isn't kindness, it's self-neglect. They don't respect politeness, they respect boundaries. And no one respects what they can access without effort. You were taught to be likable. Now be unmanipulable. Warm, yes, but access? That must be earned. Because oversharing isn't intimacy, it's unfiltered vulnerability. Give someone the full map too early and they'll use it not to know you, but to control you. Machiavelli would call that a fatal mistake. You've mistaken endurance for love. But staying when nothing changes isn't devotion, it's self-erasure. People don't change when you endure them. They change when they fear losing you. If your loyalty has no line, they'll keep crossing it. So stop bleeding quietly and calling it strength. Stop being the strong one if that strength is killing you. As Machiavelli said, never do your enemy a small injury. If you strike, strike with finality. In psychological terms, stop making your boundaries polite. Stop forgiving without consequence. Because every time you tolerate harm without resistance, you teach them your pain is not urgent, that your soul is negotiable. And it isn't. Your silence was never just silence, it was mistaken for approval. So they escalated. Not always out of cruelty, but because you trained them to. You made your suffering look noble. You called emotional suppression intelligence. You disguised self-betrayal as stability. But enough. It's time to stop labeling dysfunction as devotion. To stop shrinking in the name of peace. To stop pretending composure while your identity decays beneath the surface. Because here's the Machiavellian truth no one taught you, power is never forgettable. But nice disappears the second it's no longer useful. So become unforgettable not by shouting louder, but by becoming less accessible. Less explainable. Less easy to reach without consequence. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And clarity is the beginning of real power. They told you to be good, to be kind, to forgive. And you did. God, you did. You forgave what fractured you. Softened your voice for people who sharpened theirs. You stayed long after love had left the room. You hoped goodness would be enough. But here's the truth, the world isn't ruled by the good, it's ruled by the aware. The strategic. The ones who can read a room without announcing themselves to it. This is where Machiavelli enters not as a villain but as the ghost of brutal honesty. The whisper no one wanted you to hear. Because he didn't write for the hopeful, he wrote for the ready. Those who've outgrown illusion. Who know the world isn't fair and waiting for fairness is how you stay powerless. You know the quote, it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And you were taught to reject it. To recoil. But you misunderstood. He wasn't telling you to be cruel, he was telling you to be felt. To carry weight. To move in such a way that people pause before crossing you. Because people don't respond to your kindness, they respond to your clarity. Your silence should carry consequence. Your presence should feel sacred. You thought being morally pure would protect you. But Machiavelli knew, reality is shaped by appearance, not truth. Perception governs behavior. And in this world, stillness is feared more than kindness. Because stillness is unreadable and unreadable is untouchable. Nietzsche saw it too. You have your way. I have mine. As for the right way, it does not exist. Morality isn't fixed. It bends with power. If you never question the frame, you become a tool of it. The good are not rewarded, they are expected, used, forgotten. Jung took it deeper. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what's been happening. You called it bad luck, fate. But really, it was obedience. It was predictability. And when people know your every move, they stop respecting you and start using you. They don't push because they're cruel. They push because they can. Because your empathy became delay. Your patience became a script. While you were explaining, they were rewriting the rules. All in silence. All behind that smile you trusted. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming conscious. Machiavelli's genius wasn't manipulation, it was clarity. He understood people rarely do what's right, they do what they can get away with. And if they got away with using you, it's not always because they're evil, it's because you allowed it. You framed yourself as accessible, as explainable, as always forgiving. But no one walks away from a system that benefits them, not without cost, not without clarity, not without pain. So if you want peace, stop begging for it. Enforce it. Own the terms. Because morality that costs you your sovereignty isn't virtue, it's slow suicide. And a person who doesn't control their frame isn't living. They're being written by everyone else. Hardened not to hurt, but to see. To see through the illusion that being lovable will protect you. It doesn't. What protects you is presence. The kind that needs no explanation. The kind that shifts the energy in a room without saying a word. Because the new morality isn't about making everyone else comfortable. It's about refusing to betray yourself just to be more digestible. You weren't born to be managed. You were born to be unshakable. Transformation doesn't begin when you learn something new. It begins when you unlearn everything that taught you to shrink. You spent years trying to be agreeable, palatable, easy to love. You silenced your truth so you could be tolerated. You smiled through confusion hoping they'd see your goodness and finally stay. But here's the truth, the people who needed you small were never going to love you whole. They loved the version of you that didn't disrupt their illusion. That didn't speak too loudly, want too much, or see too clearly. So you buried the real you, the passionate you, the certain you, not to heal, but to survive. But that part of you? That's your power. Not power to control others, but the power to stop needing permission to exist. That's the shift. You stop asking, will they still love me if I say this? And start asking, will I still love myself if I stay silent? Because power isn't dominance, it's clarity. And clarity feels dangerous to people who benefited from your confusion. They liked you better when guilt made you compliant, when your kindness had no boundaries. But now you don't over-explain. You don't soften your truth to keep the peace. You don't burn just to keep others warm. And they feel it. They call it ego, distance, coldness. But it's not. It's selective access. It's self-possession. It's finally trusting yourself. This isn't bitterness, it's boundary. No more overthinking your words. No more guilt for saying no. No more apologies for being clear. You've stopped performing your pain as proof of your love. You've stopped letting your silence become a blank check. Because as Machiavelli taught, not to destroy, but to avoid being destroyed, clarity is the beginning of protection. And now, you observe before you offer access. You calculate before you commit. You pause before you reply. Because your energy is no longer a donation. Your availability is no longer a given. You've outgrown the lie that being good means being easy. You're not here to be manageable, you're here to be real. Let them say you've changed. You have. Let them say you're cold. You're not. You've just stopped melting to fit molds you were never meant to fill. And now? You see. You build. You choose. You become someone even you can finally trust. This is the part no one taught you, not in school, not in church, not in those be yourself self-help books. This is the part where clarity becomes action, silence becomes power, and presence becomes command. You've done the inner work. Now it's time to move not louder, but smarter.